As I walked into the bathroom, there was a glint on the bathroom carpet. It was reflected light from the sunlight coming through the blinds. It didn't blind me, it just caught my attention. But eventually I noticed it. A tiny circle of aluminum foil fell to the floor, and as I walked into the bathroom it reflected the light into my eyes. I picked it up and it turned out to be the back of a pill strip. The tiny circle of aluminum foil popped out when you squeezed the pill out of the strip. I checked it and it was blank on one side, but the other side was marked because it was Wednesday, and I thought that meant Tuesday was yesterday's pill, which meant the pill had to be taken every day. I know I'm not taking any pills. I'm 35 years old and as healthy as my wife Carolyn. We both recently had our annual physicals and found that we are both healthy. I know that I have to take several pills every day, but one that comes to mind is the birth control pill, which Carolyn has not taken, or at least I don't think she has, because I had a vasectomy 2 years ago after the birth of our second and last child. I have to admit that my first thought was that she might have something, but she didn't want to tell me. After a few minutes my thoughts drifted to very dark places, but then I remembered the physical and how we showed each other the reports that we were both clean. When I pulled the pills out, I instantly recognized them as the ones she had taken before my surgery, and even before that, between our kids, why had she started taking them again when we hadn't tried? We met in a bar, and although we didn't hit it off, she was interested enough in me to accept my invitation to dinner. Caroline was tall, only a few inches shorter than my 5 feet 10 inches frame. She was a former athlete and maintained a toned, lean figure and small breasts. We had the perfect family. James was born first and then Sonia. I had an impeccable family, or so I thought. Caroline went back to work and took maternity leave for each of her children. She didn't want to leave the job she loved. We had an au pair who came in to babysit during the day and came home in the evening. She was paid almost as much as Caroline earned, but Caroline didn't care. She just wanted to get out of the home and work at a job she loved. I cleaned the bathroom and put her meds back. I decided I needed to think about it. There was no point in confronting her now. I needed a plan. I needed proof what would happen after that. I didn't know. First you need to gather all the facts and then see where it leads to. I went to work as I always do, thinking about my options. First and foremost I wanted to know who it was, when, and for how long. It was someone at work. God bless her boss. That brings me to the next scary question. Were these children my children all along? I didn't let my emotions get the best of me. I knew this was going to happen and I would feel loss, betrayal, pain and anger, but first I needed to find out if it had really happened. I also ordered surveillance equipment, a couple of small recorders that I could hide in her car and bag, and a couple of miniature cameras that I could hide around the house. Considering that she was rarely in the house when I wasn't there, I suspected that she was doing it there, or at least I didn't think so. During this time I watched her carefully. Caroline didn't do anything out of the ordinary. We had a normal sex life, once or twice a week, usually on the weekends. We both stayed up late in bed. I never smelled anything suspicious on her, and she never jumped in the shower as soon as she got home. Nothing had changed. I left her to it and I went and hid the cameras, one in the bathroom, one in the living room and a third in the bedroom with a clear view of the bed. After removing the swab from Sonia's cheek and putting it in my pocket, I laid her down and read her a story until she fell asleep. I packed the swabs with the swabs removed from my cheeks and put them in the mailbox where the mailman would pick them up in the morning. We ate dinner together, then she went to take a shower, and while I had the chance, I installed recorders in her car and bag and cloned her cell phone. The weekend went by as usual. We made love both mornings before the kids got up. It became almost a ritual, even a weekend routine, and she had no calls or messages. I told her I was going to work from home and she went to the office. I took the opportunity to take the flash drive out of all the cameras and check it. The bathroom camera confirmed that she did take the pills, but what really surprised me was the bedroom camera. She was in the bedroom taking a shower on Saturday night while I was getting ready for dinner, and I saw her texting someone on her cell phone. There was nothing on my cloned cell phone, so she must have had a second cell phone, but it certainly wasn't in her purse, so where was it? When she finished writing the text, she walked over to the vent pipe and loosened the pin and opened the vent pipe and hid her phone in it. I immediately went to check the vent pipe and found that the phone wasn't there. She must have hidden the phone there when she was at home, but she takes it with her when she leaves. I need to get this phone. It's the first concrete evidence that she's up to no good. I don't know what she's up to yet, but there are indications that she was cheating on me, but I wasn't sure yet. I watched the video of her getting dressed that morning and saw her take the phone out of the ventilator, put it in her bag, and head out the door. I tiptoed into my daughter's bedroom and opened the window on her side where there was a cell phone. I picked it up and took it to my office, and a few minutes later I cloned it to my new phone. I turned the phone on and almost closed the window when I heard my wife come out of the bathroom. I approached her and sat down on the edge of Sonia's bed and began to stroke her hair when my wife came in. What happened? What happened? She asked me quietly what happened. I shook my head. I like to come and sit with one or the other of them every now and then, I whispered, just to remind myself how lucky I am to have two such wonderful children. She laughed. You're such a gentle old man, she said. Come on, let's go before we wake her up. As I sat in my office chair and stared at the cloned message, tears streamed down my face. Finally, apparently tired of trying, she knocked on the door a few times before entering my office. She was slim, red hair and green eyes, always dressed conservatively in clothes that would be appropriate for someone much older. Our relationship had always been 100% professional. I had never even raised an eyebrow in her direction, although I had seen people raise their eyebrows when it didn't turn out so well, and I had to talk to one of my business associates, a man known as Miss Office, who had flirted with her, and she had clearly told me that if he didn't quit, she would resign and sue the company, not only for constructive dismissal, but also for sexual harassment. She told me that the only reason she hasn't done this yet is because I have always respected her and have never done anything I shouldn't have. My business partner was furious and wanted to fire her immediately, and he gave us an ultimatum that either she was gone or he was gone, which would make me a 60% owner of the company instead of the 40% that I started with, and I had one less partner. Michelle went back to my office, closed and locked the door. Then she came over, moved a chair from the other side of my desk and sat a meter away from me, facing me. She took some napkins out of the place where women always seem to have them and handed them to me. I showed her my cell phone with a text message from Caroline. The other person didn't have a name, but they talked about secret meetings and what seemed like forever sex, and whoever the other person was, he knew her well enough to talk about things only I should know about, the little mole on the inside of her thighs, the cute noises she made when she made love, and a few other details only a lover would know, and not just a regular lover, a long-term lover. She asked me, do you know who she is, and I shook my head, and she asked me how you knew, and I told her I found a little silver bookmark on the bathroom floor and then told her about the pills, and the whole story flowed like a river. She says the kid's DNA will be taken on Wednesday. Can you hold out until then? I don't know, I said, and she nodded. Our producer in Portland needs to go check on I, she said, and I booked you on the next flight. You'll be back on Thursday, she said, and she picked up my phone and typed a text message and sent it to Caroline. There's something going on in Portland. We need to get to the bottom of it. I'll be back on Thursday. Love. The answer came out almost instantly. Well, let me know when you get there. When you get back. Bye bye. She looked at her phone for a moment. The corners of her mouth turned up slightly. She said, Michelle, okay, thank you. When are you free? This afternoon. Okay, bye-bye, and then go order for yourself, she said to me in a businesslike tone of voice. The fact that I was practically being asked by her to do what she said in her office meant that that's exactly what I was doing. I asked her, do you have an appointment with an old friend of mine, and she said, I just went. Lorraine turned out to be Michelle's best friend and a divorce attorney who apparently found out that her husband was cheating on her with one of his employees while she was working on Michelle's divorce case, and Michelle explained to Lorraine what was going on as I watched, almost dumbfounded by it all. Lorraine had obviously seen this many times in her career, and when she had all the facts she turned her attention to me. Gary, she said, it wasn't me. She was talking to someone else. I felt a pain in my cheek and Michelle slapped me. I snapped out of my surprise. I saw shock and elation in Lorraine's eyes, but it quickly disappeared, and as she looked at me, Gary asked me. I nodded. Do you have any idea? Hearing that cleared my engineer head. Planning is my strong suit. Kill them both, I said. I expected Michelle to at least let out a shocked exclamation, but surprisingly she grinned. Okay, Lorraine said, I get it, but unfortunately that's not an option. You see, it's against the law, but we do have a few legal options, so let's take a look at them before I start them. The first option is to do nothing. She doesn't know it, you know it, but as far as I'm concerned you've led a pretty happy life and that shouldn't change. Keep trying, keep playing the ignorant game. If the child isn't yours, sue him for adultery. Produce a forged birth certificate. If the other person is the father, sue him for alienation of affection. Get back all the money you've spent on the child. If the other person is a coworker, sue him for failure to comply with the fraternization policy, which almost every company has these days. If the other person is married, provide their partner with all the information about the affair. If she knows, we can sue her. If not, maybe I can represent her interests in the divorce. My thoughts raced through my mind like a whirlwind. I immediately understood what she meant. Option 1 was out of the question. I didn't have anyone's will. I'd been a coward, an unconscious coward, for too long. I've spent too much time building a career that gave us our current lifestyle. She can forget about taking half of everything I own and continue to let me feed her while she's having fun with someone else. Option 3, I said. Nuclear. Lorraine laughed. Well, then I'll start filling out the paperwork. I nodded and handed her the phone. Michelle and I left Lorraine's office. She took me to a small family motel. She booked me a room. Go take a shower and order something for your room, she said. She'd take full responsibility and I'd be back with something for you later. This was the only way I could cope with the stress of being on the toilet for 9 years. What really broke my heart was the fact that I was completely blind to it all. How did I not notice what she was doing? Every time she had a baby, she would go back to the same boss. She told me she liked the work and the independence, but was that the real reason, or was she just couldn't stand to be away from her lover? I looked speculatively at the minibar and was about to give in when Michelle walked into the room. She said, "Don't even think about it. I need you to think, not wallow in your grief. You need to plan, and you can't plan if you're looking at the world through the bottom of a bottle. I'm the biggest fool in the world. My whole life is falling apart and you want me to plan it all," I said, and she looked at me for a moment and I waited for her to say something, maybe sympathize with me, maybe even hug me, and then she looked at her watch and, well, she said in all seriousness, "The pity party's over, and how many times did you run into obstacles when we started the company and your plans failed?" "What does that have to do with how many times?" She insisted. "I don't know." I said, "A whole bunch of times. One time the patent office lost the patent application for the reversed filament and we won it against all odds." And I answered her why, and she asked me what was different. Then I said I had a family that depended on me, and you've got a family now, and she said that this family depends on you as well, and it's a much bigger family than the one that's at home with you, and 141 individuals and their families are depending on you to take care of it. You're both engineers, but out of the three of you, you're the only businessman, and if you lose, the company is finished. Do you think this woman cares about the families that depend on her company? If she gets half, she'll sell the company to the highest bidder. You'll lose control of the company. You know who'll buy it, and at the head will have everything you have. Do you want that? If the kids were mine, I'd make sure they were taken care of, but as for Caroline, she had it coming. I could grieve over the relationship, but I was sure everything else was fine." My confusion cleared up, and driven by anger and determination, I sat down with Michelle and began to formulate a plan. Michelle saw the change in my expression and nodded with satisfaction. "This was just the kind of writer I needed right now," she said. "I need someone who knows how to plan for someone who knows how to plan for the future." At first, I was in favor of selling my shares in the company to my partners, but Michelle rejected the idea. She thought that I couldn't trust them to run the company well or hand it over to me, and that once they became the majority shareholders, the company would be ruined. Because the trust is offshore, the courts have no jurisdiction over its documents, so the owners of the trust will be unknown. I made a list of things I needed to do and wrote to the attorney who handled the company's legal affairs, making an appointment to meet the next day after Michelle left. The next day, the alarm on my cell phone woke me up with a message from Carolyn. "Is everything okay? That you didn't notify me of your arrival? I'm sorry, I planned to stay up late. Now that everything is set up, I should be back on Thursday." Michelle knocked on my door a little after 8. I had taken another shower and was thinking about going to breakfast. She said I should go with her. We went to a restaurant down the street and sat in a booth and ate bacon and pancakes with maple syrup. I don't understand why I'm acting like this. It's as if my world hasn't collapsed and my heart hasn't burst out. But I don't want to. But right now I need to work. "Brian Spencer," Michelle said, calling out my lawyer's name, and he called and said he'd have time to meet with us at 10 o'clock, so we can go to your bank, cash out your 401k, and then get the mortgage on your house released before we get there. And Michelle laughed and said, "That's what's so great about Vegas. Once you've got all this capital, you go to Vegas and spend a week, spend a ton of money, and then file for divorce so that when you're tried in court, you'll be so far in debt, in fact, that the bank will foreclose on your house and your paychecks won't be nearly enough to live on, assuming the kids aren't yours. If the kids are yours, you'll put your entire 401k in escrow for their college fund. Caroline won't be able to touch it, and technically she'll be earning more than you, and she'll easily be able to afford the house on her own, and maybe even end up paying you alimony. When will you get the DNA results?" Kim, Michelle asked, and I pushed my phone to her. She took it and watched the screen scroll up a few times. I looked at her face for clues and tried to guess what she might say from her expression. The results weren't in yet. She said that according to the tracking data, she should receive them within the next 12 hours. She said that according to the tracking data, the results should be received within the next 12 hours. I let out a long breath that I didn't even realize I had let out. She said the bank should be open when she got up. I closed all of our savings accounts, including our children's college fund, and transferred the money to an account I opened in my own name. My attorney had done a great deal of tinkering with our plan, but if it could have been done right, he did it anyway. I said, you forgot one thing. He said that when we outlined our plan to him you had a marriage contract. I did. I'm surprised I didn't realize it was a condition of you starting it was a condition of the partnership agreement when you started working. He reminded me that all partners are required to sign a prenuptial agreement. A prenuptial agreement only applies to the company but has no rights to the company's assets. I know Robert implied that you wanted to make money, but you could have taken a loan from the company's pension fund to make up the difference. This means that your income will be significantly reduced when your assets are valued, and since everything else will be tied to the company, this is sacrosanct. When the bank forecloses on your house, your credit rating will take a hit and you will lose half of your bank balance, but other than that, she won't get anything. I asked, if my entire paycheck goes to alimony, I still need a place to live and food to eat, not to mention, I have 2 kids. I paused. At least I think they are waiting for the kids. He said, have you decided what you are going to do about it? If they weren't yours, would you still be involved in their lives? I don't know. I said, that's a horrible idea. I'll have to wait until I'm sure before I make that kind of decision. And don't forget the rest of your plan about the other attorneys. He reminded me, I'll bet you get enough money from the lawsuit against her company to pay off your loans, and when this is all over you'll be getting your full paycheck back. If the child isn't yours, let alone the cost of claiming it back from the father, since this happened after the divorce and won't be considered part of the settlement agreement, could you contact Robert on my behalf to see if he'd be interested in selling? He said, and we shook hands and left his office. We left feeling relieved that the building plans were starting to come together, which always gives me a deep sense of satisfaction, and then I remembered the reason we had these plans. I'm so sorry, Gary, she said softly, and it was the least businesslike answer I'd ever heard. She handed me the phone and I read the results for myself. Neither child was biologically mine, even though they had the same father. The double whammy of losing 2 children was replaced by my anger at the betrayal. Not only did she pass them off as mine, but she convinced me to have a vasectomy, which meant I could never have children of my own again. This is not the time or the place. Calm down, we'll get through this. I promise. I took a few deep breaths to suppress my anger. I really wanted to inflict some serious bodily harm on someone. I even thought about hiring a hitman to kill the asshole who had the kids that were supposed to be mine. Michelle pulled herself together again and led me out of the diner. Lorraine called me. She said she wanted to see you. We went to Lorraine's office. Lorraine looked somber, and when we walked into her office I said I could go switch the flash drive and we could see what was going on, and she said to do it now and then we could make a plan. Lorraine checked her phone. Oprah was in the game center with Sophie and James. She said I'd keep an eye on her and let you know if she came out. My house was about 30 minutes away from Ryan's office. Michelle drove fast and we got there without any problems. I swapped the flash drive and we quickly checked the house but didn't find anything suspicious. Then we went back to Lorraine's office and we checked the flash drive. I decided not to look at the one in the bedroom. I didn't need to see what was going on there. Obviously we were talking about a man. As soon as he walked in the door I suspected it was her boss, Bill Wright, who she had worked for all the time we were together. What happened when he pulled up in front of the house almost killed me. He had his own key. As he walked in the door James looked up and saw him. Papa Bill. He let out a cry of surprise and ran over to him and hugged him. This let go of my hand and I broke down and started crying. I couldn't watch anymore. Lorraine asked me if I wanted to rest. I shook my head. The pain eased a little but the anger started to take over again. I asked her what to do next. I've got a copy of the terms of employment for your wife's company. Lorraine said that one of the clauses forbids fraternizing with people, so you could sue the company for violating that clause, because the person who was fraternizing with your wife was a senior manager in the company. The company can't say she didn't know about it. We explained to Laura what the company attorney had told me and what he had suggested. She suddenly smiled, picked up the phone and called him for a copy of the prenuptial agreement, which he emailed to her. That was great, she said. Read the marriage contract and throw out everything I said before. Your attorney's plan is absolutely correct. We can sue her company for not complying with a court order and is suing her for estrangement of affection, and she's suing him for making a false statement on her birth certificate. They are both suing her for the money she spent on the baby, and so far there's a huge amount of money just in deductions for the medical bills for the birth of the baby, and it all hinges on whether or not Robert wants to sell the company, and I think we are gonna have to wait for him to give us an answer. She said you can't stay here. I asked why. Because you can't be alone. She said you'll just mope around or attack the minibar. I want you to stay where I can take care of you. She said this as she gathered up some of my things. She took me by the hand and walked me out of the room, then checked me over and took me to her car. Where are we going? She took me into a room with a bathroom, took a shower and changed her clothes. She called for dinner in 30 minutes. We ate dinner in silence. I think the dinner was supposed to be delicious, but I didn't taste it. I didn't have the strength to worry about it. All I wanted to do now was to carry out my plan. I was on autopilot. My destination was set. I was just thinking about what to do after dinner when the phone rang. I was startled. I hoped it wasn't Caroline. "Hello, Robert," I said listlessly. "What's the matter?" That's all he asked. Robert and I have been friends since college. We studied together, and it was that program we did together that gave us the foundation to start our own business. I got the majority of the company because I had more money invested in it than he did. Caroline was lying to me when I said I wouldn't sound like this all the time. He said incredulously, "You mean the kids aren't mine?" I told him, and there was silence on the other end of the line. "So you want to tie up all your assets in the company and hide behind a prenuptial agreement?" And he asked. Either Brian Spencer, our attorney, explained it all, or he knows more about partnership agreements than I do, and I said, "I'll have Brian prepare the paperwork." And Gary said after a while, "I'm really sorry. I know you don't feel that way right now, but it'll get better later, I promise. I've been through almost what you're going through right now, and it's really getting better." And it hadn't occurred to me until that point that he got divorced about 4 years ago, and I don't know the details, because even though we're friends, he's a very private person, and all I know is that it wasn't very nice. So he remembered the marriage contract he used himself. The first thing we did was go to the company's attorney, Brian Spencer, and he had all the paperwork ready for me to acquire Robert, and we did the whole deal in less than 30 minutes, and I gave him everything I had, and I took my savings out of my house and my 401k, and I had to take a loan out of the company's pension plan to cover the rest of it, and then we went over to Laura's. I showed her all the paperwork for the deal, and she was so happy it was perfect. She said, "I'll drop it off today and we can file it on Monday, and we'll serve it on both him and the company if you want to." "And where do you want to serve it to her?" "And that would be the most embarrassing for her." And I said, "I'd be happy to pay for it if you can serve it through a billboard on the Super Bowl." She laughed and said, "We'll serve it at the office." And she said, "On Monday 10 a.m. If I mail it today, I'll get it tomorrow afternoon." I nodded, and then I asked her what now. I looked at Michelle, and she said, "Now we've got 2 stops to make you go back to the office and pretend you just got back from putting out a fire in Portland. Do you think you'll be able to hold out at home until Monday?" I said, "No need to guess." She said, "Tell me what I need to help you. Hang in there until then." "I don't know." I said, "Any good news?" She smiled at me and, "Let's go," she said. To my surprise, we stopped at the medical center where I had all my tests done and where I had the surgery I'll never be a father for. "What are we doing here?" I asked. "Do you want good news?" She said, "Let's go," and I followed her into the clinic. The administrator nodded and signaled for us to sit down. We sat for less than 2 minutes, and my doctor came out and invited me into the clinic. He knew who she was, and he knew she wasn't my wife because he was both my doctor and Carolyn's doctor. Why I was asking about my secretary's involvement was my business, not his. Gary said, "I know you want to ask about the vasectomy reversal." Again tears came to my eyes. I still had a chance to be a father. It meant surgery, but it was a small price to pay to be able to have my own child. "I know this is hard to accept," the doctor said, "but here is the information about the surgery and the cost. Unfortunately, your insurance will not cover it." Dr. Michelle said, standing up and taking the information from him. "We will be in touch." I stood up as well and let her lead me out of the clinic and towards her car. I let go of her right away and stepped back. "I'm sorry," I said. "It's okay, Gary," she said softly. "Everything's fine." We got into her car and made one more stop before heading back to the office. She said, "I've been to Bill Wright's house several times during the years that Carolyn worked for him. He and his wife Stephanie lived in a nice place just outside of town. It was a gated community, and they held some of their corporate events here." And when I asked Michelle why she got out of the car and walked to the front door of the house and I followed her, she didn't even have to knock. The security guard who took us in told Stephanie we were on our way, and she was standing in the doorway waiting for us. "Gary," she asked, "you must be Michelle Wright, his secretary. You called?" "Right, yes, it's me," Michelle replied. "Come in," Stephanie said, and led us into an office off the hallway. I had never been in this room before, judging by the pictures on the desk and on the wall. This was Bill's office, but she sat down at the desk and pointed to the chair across from her. She seemed to think that this wasn't a private phone call. "What can I do for you?" Stephanie asked, looking at me. I sat and looked at her, unable to say anything. "You know." Stephanie sighed and said sadly, "I don't know. I suspected it, but I don't know. I couldn't find any proof or anything that would have gotten me a lawyer, or I would have taken every penny of that asshole's money a long time ago." The video of him and Caroline was at my house and my son was there calling him. I couldn't finish the sentence. The lump threatened to strangle me. I was lost again. Oh Gary, I'm so sorry, she said. I've suspected he was in Caroline for years but he's so careful. I stalked him. I checked his cell phone for emails. I even challenged him but he managed to convince me that I'm just being paranoid. Honestly, if I were sure, if I had proof, I would come to you right away, but I can't ruin what seems to be a happy marriage on mere suspicion. The question is, what are you going to do about it? She asked, now that you have proof. She smiled slightly at that. I see, she said. I don't blame you, and I won't say anything. If you have the name of a good divorce attorney, I'd appreciate it. Michelle took a business card out of her bag and handed it to her, thanked her. She said, would a week be enough? I nodded. Good. She said I would be in touch. She showed her card. I agreed with her. She stood up. Obviously our meeting was over. Michelle and I stood up. Stephanie came over to me and gave me a hug and pecked me on the cheek. I'm sorry, she said. Take care of him, she said to Michelle, who flinched as she hugged me. He deserved better. We went back to the office and I spent the rest of the day finishing up what I was going to do while I was in Portland. I bid her good night and thanked her for her help. I worked late at the office. There was a lot to do. Caroline's message arrived around 8 o'clock. When will you be home? It may be another hour or two. I have to finish up some things after my trip. I may be asleep already, and I have to get up early in the morning. I love you XX. I couldn't reply to this message, and I worked until almost 11 o'clock. When I got home, the house was pitch black, and there didn't seem to be anything unusual. I felt choked up and had to hide in the bathroom. I couldn't let Caroline find me crying over my children. They weren't even mine. Less than 48 hours ago they were my children, my flesh and blood, my pride and joy, and now they were just more evidence of my wife's infidelity. I decided to wait and see what would happen anyway. The decision probably wouldn't be in my favor. I went to bed and tried not to wake Caroline. I didn't fall asleep right away, and by the time the alarm clock woke me up in the morning, Caroline had already left and the housekeeper was in the kitchen feeding the children. When I walked in the door, she was really still looking at me, laughing at me, a fool who couldn't satisfy his wife. Did she know that the children weren't mine at all? Had she taken them to say goodnight to Papa Bill, as she often did to me? And I imagined her and Caroline in a lascivious threesome with Bill Wainwright, while the children cried in the next room, and I shook my head angrily. She knew what I inferred. And on Monday I would have taken pleasure in being afraid of her, and if she had told me, she would have lost her job, and she would have had a good time, and she would have had a good time. She'd lose her job, she could have left. I thought that, but she seemed to have feelings for the children she'd cared for before Sonia was born as well, and I was angry, but maybe it wasn't the wrong person who'd been born. I went into the office and she brought me my morning coffee as she had done every day for the 9 years she had worked for me. Then she sat down on the other side of the desk, and it wasn't until then that I noticed that she had brought coffee for herself as well, and I asked her, when did I start getting involved in marketing? Michelle said, your friends, family, church groups, volunteer groups, everyone who deals with her needs to know who she is and what she has done. It won't end well for me. I said I will be a laughing stock, a cock who can't even satisfy his own wife and raise other people's children. People are going to believe this nonsense, and when we blow her out of the water, she's going to respond with everything she's got, and we'll say it first, and people won't believe any of the counter-accusations, and of course some people will, but there's nothing that can be done about that. And Michelle prepared a press kit with all the evidence of Caroline's infidelity, and there's a copy of the private investigator's report, a copy of the DNA report that shows that I'm not the father of either of my children, and Caroline gave her a Bill's DNA sample, which she checked against the DNA test results I received, which proved that he was definitely the father of both children. We have this new information in a package ready to be submitted, and they will be sent to Caroline's parents, my parents, Caroline's brother and sister, who are very close to me, and electronically to all of her contacts on Facebook and LinkedIn, as well as to anyone else that I can send to our immediate family. It took me less than an hour to design and build this little device that has a motor, a timer, and a battery that I can set so that the motor will rotate to create a vibration after a certain amount of time. When I got home on Friday night, I hid the device under Sophie's pillow and waited for the courier company to leave. It was supposed to be ready the next morning at 6:06 a.m. the next morning, the time we usually got up, so that I could wake Sophie up, thus eliminating our sex on the weekend mornings, and it all worked out perfectly. I was woken up by Sophie, who came into our room and climbed into our bed. Saturday night, Caroline unexpectedly tried to tease me for sex. I pretended to be asleep and waited for her to come out of the bathroom. Sunday, we decided to take the kids for a walk and played at the zoo all day. Several times throughout the day, I looked at Caroline, the woman I loved, the woman I thought I loved, and the two children I cared for, the two children I thought were mine. On Monday, I was excited and told Caroline I would be working from home, and she went to work at the usual time, poking into my office to tell me she was leaving, and I pretended to be fully engaged as I looking at emails and just grunted, 15. She knocked on my office door. She wanted to take the kids to the play center, but I said no, they should stay home, which surprised her. I'd never turned her down before. She just nodded and went back to the kids. 30. We had a conference call with Lorraine Gary, and Lorraine said, "This is the last time you're going to stop, and I'm not saying that you should stop. I'm just saying if you changed your mind over the weekend, now's the time to say it." "No," I said without a doubt. "Then I'll see you on the other side." And Lorraine said, "Everything's ready, Anne." The first one arrived 3 minutes later, the second one arrived 5 minutes later, the third one arrived, and then my phone rang. Not Caroline as I thought, but my mother. "Gary, hi Mom." I said, "What's going on?" She asked, "Did you look at the package I sent?" I asked, "Yes, but you know as much as I do." I said, "Caroline has been cheating on me, probably my whole married life with her boss. The baby isn't mine. I'm going to divorce this Gary, can't you?" My mom said, "No, Mom, listen, I have to work. I have another call," I said, and hung up. The phone rang again right away. This time it was Caroline. "Gary," she said. I didn't pick up, and waited for her to go on. "We have to talk," she went on. Still didn't pick up. "I have to go home." She ended the call. Caroline was on her way. I told Michelle I'd get out of the way, and she said I wanted her to stay. But I didn't know what to do. I just looked up at her and she called me. She said, "Wait until you know what's going on," and she left. About 20 minutes later Caroline arrived home. I heard her car pull in. She didn't even bother to go into the garage. I didn't know what she would look like when she walked in the door. I didn't know if she was going to walk in all guns blazing or slink away with her tail between her legs. Anyway, she walked into my office and took a seat at the desk across from me and sat down. "Gary, my lawyer's license was in the package you received when you were served, and if there's anything you think I should know, tell her." "What about the kid?" she asked. "What kid?" So I could pick up the pieces and get on with my life. I called the waitress into the room and she could hear me because the door to my office was open and she was only in the next room. "You're fired," and I said, "Leave immediately." "What did she say?" "I have video evidence of you and Bill talking about the kids." "Gary," Caroline said, "you can't fire her. I pay her salary." A pair looked at Caroline with gratitude in her eyes. "Well," I said, "I've contacted the agency and told them you're complicit in the affair, so if Caroline wants to keep you, she's not only going to have to pay you, she's going to have to take care of all the other things like tax, vacation, pension, sickness, not to mention insurance." "Do you have to do that?" Caroline said she shouldn't have to. "You're talking again." I said, "I told you I don't want to hear it. What I want is for you to get your things, take your children and get out of my house. It's my home too." She said, "According to the papers it's not," and I said, "It's only registered in my name, so until the court makes a ruling, get out of here." She stood up and walked towards her daughter. I closed the office door and stayed inside while she was gathering her things, and a few minutes later she came back with Sonia in her arms. I said, "She's not my daughter and is not my son. Take them to Papa Bill and let him take care of his kids. They have nothing to do with me." "Gary, I'm getting out," I said. She heard the front door close, and a few minutes later her car started and she was gone, and I let go of the breath I had been holding for what seemed like a long time, and then it fell to pieces. I looked up and saw Michelle holding me. She pulled me to her and hugged me. I sobbed uncontrollably and it took a while for me to regroup. I had just thrown away 9 years of my relationship, my marriage, my children, my life. I really didn't want to look at the world anymore. "She'll be back. Do you really want to drive you out of your own home to please her?" We gathered some of my clothes and all my important papers, and I had to figure out where to live, but I loaded my car with my stuff into Michelle's and left. I didn't understand what had happened when I realized that I had moved into Michelle's spare room. All my clothes were in the closet and all my papers were neatly stacked there. Since Caroline had applied, I worked for a week and then went back to her house with Michelle for dinner and then to bed. In the morning she brought me coffee and made breakfast, and then we went to the office together. Nothing seemed to have changed between us. She was still as businesslike as ever, and I never smiled at her except for the first day when I hugged her when I broke down at home. I don't know the details, but apparently we filed a claim for an amount that the company couldn't cover. They had insurance, but the maximum was $1 million, and we filed a claim for far more than that. My lawyer, Lorraine, is grinning like a Shalonian cat. "What am I going to do?" "Their attorney is asking you to agree to immediately and permanently terminate the senior employee and cancel her pension," Lorraine replied, "along with an obligation to keep Carolyn on for at least 3 years and compensation of $1.5 million, Lorraine said, and they nodded in understanding. Lorraine joined us for the next meeting, which was with Bill Wainwright's attorney. The last meeting of the day was with Carolyn's attorney. Carolyn was in the office with them but didn't look at me when I went in. Michelle and Lorraine were there. This account on the divorce petition is just ridiculous. Carolyn's attorney started to say your client is the major shareholder and CEO of a company that is worth about $20 million by recent estimates, not to mention the savings in the house and the assets in the 401k. He's also had to take out a loan from the firm's pension fund, and one of the partners is trying to sell the firm. It's important that the shares not fall into the hands of a competitor who's been trying to take over the firm for several years. Lorraine said Carolyn intentionally falsified birth records to list my client as the father of the child for the purpose of fraud. In addition, and this is a separate issue, we are seeking damages for serious injuries because she intentionally persuaded him to undergo sterilization surgery, which he agreed to under the belief that he was the father of the child. I just received a letter from her attorney stating that the restraining order has been lifted and that the house is now mine and that I can come back into the house at any time. 2 months have gone by and I'm still living in Michelle's spare room. After we divorced, Carolyn moved in with her parents. Despite all the evidence I've provided, they are firmly on her side and won't talk to me. For me, it's not a loss. For some reason, Stephanie hasn't divorced Bill like she promised. I don't know why and I don't want to find out, because he's lost his corporate job and pension. I don't know if she and Carolyn have met. I haven't seen her since that day in her attorney's office, and I have no interest in meeting her. I was sitting at my desk working when Michelle knocked on the door and walked into the room without waiting for me to answer. Bill Wainwright was dead. Michelle said the bastard got what he deserved and she put a formal envelope on my desk and we both knew what was in it, and I took it and opened it and I said I'm free at last, and Michelle said I'm free at last, and then she did the last thing I wanted to do. She kissed me, not a peck on the cheek or even on the lips, but a full kiss. When she finally let go of me, I sat back in my chair stunned and nervous as the mainmast in a teapot. She giggled and looked down to see my obvious arousal. For 9 years, she said, I took care of you. You're the most perfect man I've ever seen. You've never even looked at my legs or my ass in a different way or touched me. I love you. I waited for you for so many years and now you're free. I know you've always respected me and that's a form of love. We're a great team. I know you like a wife knows her husband, and if you think about it, you know me too. Give me a chance to show you that not all women lie. Then I realized that I had and still have real feelings for Michelle, and with Caroline I didn't have to explore those feelings or evaluate them, but now I absolutely do. Do you have anything to say? She said, a concerned look on her face. I asked her how many children she had. She looked puzzled. She asked me how many children I had. I said we should have a few children.